All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Most of you know me, maybe, hopefully, I don't know. Eddie Kirkendall, advisor. So I know there's a couple of kind of semi-new faces that I haven't really talked to that much, but today we're going to be talking about APA. You know, this is more just kind of a cram session, so it's not going to be one of those things where we're going to go super in-depth, because I can tell you when it comes to like APA, MLA, Chicago style, Turabian, there are so many different rules, and I don't know if anyone can truly master it. The idea is to know where your resources are, where you can get information. I know earlier we mentioned about citationmachine.net is a good one. You know, I do think you have to be careful, you know, when you're looking at resources, because sometimes they can give you the wrong information. So it's always good to look at multiple sources. Today we're actually going to look at some of those resources and give you some ideas of where you can go and find, you know, some information. I love examples. I'm big on examples. I'm a person that has to visually see something. So the slides that we're going to be talking about today are actually going to have examples that we'll look at. And so, but before we get started, what I like to do is for each of you to kind of introduce yourself and tell me about where you feel like comfort level when it comes to APA. So it kind of lets me know, like, have you had to write papers using APA? Like, I mean, have you only done maybe one or two in your life, or have you done this quite a bit? Because I like to, learn from the students as well. So I'll start here.
I'm Kennedy French, and my comfort level with APA is I just used it for a speech class whenever I had to cite my sources for my speeches and my information that I collected for them. So probably like a 3 if we're doing a scale of 1 to 10.
Okay.
My name is Ana Lopez, and my comfort level with APA, I just had a essay due, and it was an APA essay, so I went to tutoring, and she kind of like helped me with everything. She like told me the basics.
Okay.
I got a good grade on it. So
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm going to go like 5.
All right.
I'm Shelby Wilson. I haven't really used it except once in the last paper I just did, but I didn't feel like it was much different than MLA other than the citations.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
With the experience.
Cassie Walters. I am an English major, so I'm probably not going to use APA ever. But if I go on to get another degree, I might get a degree in something else. So I figure it's useful to know.
And with your major, because we'll talk about this a little bit in class, what is the primary one that you use?
MLA. All the
MLA.
time.
MLA is very common, especially among English majors. So depending on your major is going to play a big factor in what type of citations you have to use.
Where
So
would you see more APA?
APA, which
Journalistic
we'll talk about in just a second. Yeah, I mean, the best example, psychology, sociology, social work, great examples of using APA quite a bit. So.
My name is Larkin Nada, and I've only used APA for maybe 2 papers I had to do, so I'm kind of new to it.
Okay, and what classes? What did you have to use it for?
And the business communication and international business.
Okay, because that's one of my choices as well, that that you'll use it in this business. So let's look about what we're going to cover. So I mean, we're going to mainly focus on APA style, and that involves a lot of different things. We're going to mainly look at in-text citation, and we'll look at reference page, because when we talk about MLA, we talk about the works cited page. When it comes to APA, references. There's always those little subtle differences in the wording that you'll use. And so, like for example, Chicago style, which is the one that I always had to use because I was a political science major, so political science history, they like to use Chicago or Turabian. We called it the bibliography. So you see all these little subtle differences. So one thing that I'll do is, as we're talking about it, is I'm going to kind of go and look at the differences between the two, just slightly. Because eventually in time, when you start looking at references, you're going to notice those differences. If you do it long enough, you'll catch them. And then we'll look at resources, because I honestly think that is the best thing that students need to have, because ask yourself this: it's Saturday, it's 11 o'clock at night. Who are you going to be able to contact at that time if you have a question that you need answered when it comes to APA? Chances are you're going to have to get online. You're going to have to get online. You're going to have to find a credible source in order to get your answer. So it's good to know where to go. And you want to be careful with that, because sometimes you may be looking at the wrong place and they're giving you not the right information. And so then you turn it in, and then you get it marked off as a result of that. Now, one thing I always tell students is always know where you get this information at, because let's say your professor marks something up, you can at least justify why you did it by saying, well, I went to this site. Now, if they say, yeah, but that's not a credible site, then you have a problem. But if you can say, I went to Purdue Owl, that's a pretty credible site to go to. And so they're going to understand that. And so always know where the resources are. And always remember that if you ever get stuck on a paper, and if you need me to look at it, just stop by my office. I'm more than happy to look at any of your papers. And so if you're not sure on something, I'm there. You can email me as well. I'm more than happy to look at anything like that. So here we go. So APA. The first thing we need to do is actually define what APA is. So it is the American Psychological Association. That's what APA actually stands for. So one thing I always like to point out is, where are you most likely going to use APA? When it comes to discipline, like your majors. So normally you'll see social sciences. And what I mean by social sciences, because there are a lot of different areas, I mean that could be even some history classes. It really depends on the professor. Most professors in political science and history like Chicago style Turabian, which Turabian is almost identical to Chicago style. There's only little subtle differences. But psychology, linguistics, sociology, economics, criminology, business, nursing, those are where you're most likely going to encounter APA. Social work, ties kind of into sociology, psychology is kind of in the middle there. And so, how many of you are going to be majoring in one of those areas there, potentially? What's your major in?
Business management.
Okay, business management. And you've already said you've encountered APA already. I mean, APA is very popular in the business sector. And so how many of you feel like when you are sitting down and you're working on this, how many of you actually feel nervous when you're trying to cite things? I mean, actually, I'm afraid I'm going to mess up here and they're going to take points off, or, potential plagiarism as a result. I mean, most of you should be worried. I mean, I was always worried. When I wrote a paper, I don't care how many papers I wrote, how many times that I had to use, APA, MLA, Chicago style, I was always nervous. And I always say, if you're not nervous, there's something wrong then, because, it is a big deal. You want to make sure you're doing it right. One thing that I always do, regardless of knowing where my resources are, I would always try to work on a paper way in advance if I could. I would work on it in advance, and then I would use the professor's office hours to go by there and ask them. And I would show them my work. It's one thing just going there asking them questions, hey, how do you do this? But if you go there and you actually have work that you can show them that you're doing, a lot of times they're more receptive about helping you more, because they look at it as, you are really, trying to get ahead of the game, you're producing, good work there. And so they can actually look at it and probably mark it up a little bit. And so I did that all the time for my classes. So most of the time, by the time I actually turned it in, I felt pretty comfortable, because most of the time my professor would look at least once or twice before I actually did that. So I would always encourage you, work early, show your professor if you can. Now, hey, will you have a professor who doesn't want to look at your stuff? I can tell you I've had a few professors that didn't really seem to care too much, wanted to help me a whole bunch, but I always at least try. And so most of them will. So let's look at some examples. So when we talk about your paper, there are typically 4 parts to APA. So 4 parts to APA that stand out to me. So one, you're going to have a title page. And I try to give you an example of the title page. And so the title page, there are a few things that you're going to see that stand out. You have a running head, and that's something that you're going to see on every page as well, which has like a short, abbreviation kind of your title there. And then obviously the center, you have the title and so forth, and what the class is, sometimes. And I've seen this so many different ways. And how many of you encountered, different cover pages? Not everyone does the same thing. So they're normally not too picky on that. So, but normally you have that running head, you have the title or so in the middle, you have your name, what the class is, the professor, and the date on the bottom. But I can tell you that I've seen so many different ways when they do a cover page. I would just say have something similar to that. Now, if your professor, and some of them will, they will actually give you a template, as an example, in your class. How many of you encountered that? Okay, and so when they do that, do you make sure that you follow their template? They're basically giving it to you. So I would always say if they give you a template, follow theirs, because that's what they really want. But if they don't, then you can follow something similar to this. You're going to have the abstract, page, that's the second part. So if we're going in order here, you're going to have, your title page, your abstract, and then you'll have your main body paragraph, so whatever, your content that you're writing, and then at the end, you'll have your references. Typically, that's what you're going to see. I mean, now it can get a little bit more elaborate, if you're writing, a 25, 30-page paper, you can have an index page. I mean, it can get a lot more detailed, but typically the type of paper that you're going to write, you're going to have those 4 parts. How many of you encountered those 4 parts? How, you've all written APA, so would you say that's kind of what you followed, that format so far? Okay. Now, tell me something different about MLA. Do you have that cover page? No. So that's a difference right off the bat. So if I saw a cover page like this, I know it's not going to be most likely MLA. It could be, APA, which it most likely is. You also do this with Chicago style and Travian. You have a cover page. So automatically I know most likely not MLA, going to be APA or Chicago style or Travian. And then I start looking at like the running head, which kind of gives me a clue right there. I've had some professors tell me I didn't have to have that. Just depends on the professor. So that's why I always ask questions, always, and always make sure that you start way in advance. So abstract. So what is the abstract? It is a single paragraph typically. Now a single paragraph. You will try to it's like a summary of your paper. Is one of the best ways to describe it. Summary of your paper is going to focus on like the main points, whatever methods that you may be using. So like if you're actually going to be using like statistics or anything like that, or you're going to be surveying people, you talk about that method, how you are gathering information, findings that you may have come to, and your conclusions. So a summary, short summary, of your paper. When they read your abstract, they should know exactly what you're going to be talking about throughout that paper. It gives them a snapshot, so to speak. And normally you want to keep it within 200 words or less. I guess the best is between 150 and 200. That's what most professors have told me in the past. Around 150 to 200 words. Because I was always big on like word count. That's like when I wrote papers, I counted my paragraphs, I counted how many words I had, obviously you can look at the bottom, it'll tell you, but I was really big on knowing exactly how many paragraphs I wanted, and when I wrote my papers, I did paragraph by paragraph. That's what I focused on. I didn't try to think as a 20-page paper as a whole. I would just do one paragraph at a time, so that way I could break it down. And so how many of you feel comfortable with an abstract? Do you think that's the easiest part or the hardest part of your paper? Give me an example. You're kind of hesitant, you're thinking about it, I can tell. So, easy part or hard part of your paper?
I think if you know what you're writing about.
I've often heard that you go on to your main body first and then go back and write your abstract.
And that's what I was getting at. That's what I was trying to lean us towards, because that's what worked for me. Because the abstract can be hard, to start when you still don't really know 100% of what you want to focus on. You kind of have a vague idea, but you're not quite there. So a lot of times what I would do is I'd work on the body paragraphs and work on my conclusion, and then I would go back and do the abstract towards the last. Because you can go in any order that you want. You just have to make sure when you actually put the final product there, you have it in the right order. So the abstract I would normally do towards the end. And that way it could be a better summary of the abstract I'm having there, because I already know what I've talked about. And so I would always encourage you to do the body paragraphs at least first, because you're going to know exactly what you're talking about when you do that. Students that I find, when it comes to abstract, the biggest challenge they have, length. Sometimes it's way too short or way too long. How many of you feel like you encounter that sometimes? Have you ever been told that you should write around 200 words? Or is that the first time you heard it? So you're shaking your head like you have heard that.
Yeah.
And so.
I forgot that I've actually written a paper in APA.
Okay. And so yeah, around that 200 mark, maybe a little less, just depends. Every sentence counts, essentially, in that abstract because it's so short. And so every sentence counts. Now, when we look at in-text citation, and that's something that I feel like a lot of students struggle with, in-text citations and the reference pages, so we'll focus more on that. So, in-text citation provides at least the author's last name year of publication, and then sometimes the page number if it has that. Now, there is a difference between MLA. MLA, you don't have 3 things, you have 2 things. And what are the 2 things for MLA? Name, last name, page number. The big differences with APA, and you notice right there in the example there, the Hendrick you see there towards the bottom there, on that first paragraph, they have Hendrick, comma, 1992, comma, and then P period, which stands for page, obviously, and then 46, they close a parenthesis. And then the period is on the outside.
That's how MLA is.
MLA, you do not have to have the year of publication.
Well, yeah, the period's the same.
But the period's same, yes. So you do not have to have it. Now, MLA, at least what I have seen, they just have Hendrick, comma, and then you just have the page number. Like not the actually P period, but just 46 is what I've seen. And so, but the actual P itself, you see more APA. At least that's what I've noticed anyways. And so, but I would say the strongest difference is that year of publication. That's how I know it's APA, year of publication. And so now sometimes they won't have a page number, so you can only put what you have on there, such as the name, last name, and then the year of publication. And so you see, those 2 different examples there. And so if you look here are some examples of like if you were actually going to quote someone. And so let's take a look at that real fast. So I have 3 different examples of how you can cite something here, using in-text citations. So one, we have according to Jones, and then you have, the parentheses, 1998, the publication, and then you put in the quote, and then of course all you need for the, in-text is just page number, and that's it. Because you introduce the author's name and, the publication year in the sentence that you're quoting, and that's why. And then of course, another example, would be here, Jones, and then you put, the year, publication found, and then the quote, and then, you end the parentheses there, but you're continuing your sentence slightly there. And then the other one is she stated, and if you do she stated or he stated, whatever, then you have to put the full version there because you didn't do it, in the sentence that you were quoting. So that's why there's a difference. I always encourage students, use all 3. Try to use all 3, methods when you're writing your paper. And the reason why is because it's going to make your professor know that you know how to do all these different ways. So it looks good and it's not redundant. Because how many times can you say, according to Jones, throughout your paper? It really kind of hurts the flow of it. And so if you can mix it up just a little bit, I think it looks a little bit better in your paper. How many of you have tried this, in your paper? Or do you find yourself kind of guilty of doing kind of the same thing?
That's even relevant with MLA to
Exactly.
switch it up like that.
Yes. MLA, any type of citation that you're going to do using Chicago style, whatever it may be, it's good to try to mix it up. Now, what I found was in Chicago style, they want us to do a lot of footnotes. That was kind of the big thing, with that. But hopefully you don't have to encounter that too much. Through the most part, APA, this is what you'll encounter. But those are the 3 different types, and I would always encourage to try to mix it up and do those throughout your paper. It just really shows that you know kind of what you're doing there. So some other examples, so long quotes. Students love using long quotes. Now in MLA, we call them block quotes. I mean, normally it's around 4 or more sentences. And so we indent everything. And that means not just, the first sentence, but you indent the second where it's all kind of flushed over, right there. And so when it comes to APA, they don't say 4 or more sentences. They say 40 words or more. A little bit different. They do more of a word count that they're saying. And so now do you have to count every single word? I mean, can you ballpark it a little bit? Probably. Sometimes what you can do is you can just highlight it. And it'll show you how many words that you have down there at the bottom for the highlighted part. That's another way of doing it. And so their example is obviously they have Jones. Do you see any quotation marks? No quotations. Because it's going to be a block quote. It's all this is going to be kind of pushed over a little bit. So it's going to stand out. So that's why you don't have to have quotation marks for there. I mean, obviously you'll have the name, publication you can do. Now the big difference that I notice is, look where the period is. Block quotes, you have the period here. You don't have it outside of the parentheses. That is the difference. And it's the same in MLA when it comes to a block quote. You have the period on the inside, not the outside. So that's just a little subtle difference there, but a lot of students I find, because they're so used to putting it on the outside, will still do that on a block quote. And then if the professor's really picky, they can count off on it. And so if we go back, you see where the period is. It's on the outside. Block quote, inside. So that's just a very little subtle difference there. I can tell you MLA, they do the same exact thing when it comes to that block quote. The only difference is they say 4 or more sentences, and here they say 40 words or longer. So, reference page. One, you actually have references. That's what you center. And you put references. MLA is what? Works cited. I notice some students, when they use MLA, they also forget to put the S, where it says works. They just put work cited, not works cited. So, you got to know those little differences. And I've seen some people leave the S off when it comes to references. They just put reference. So you want to make sure that you have references, in there. Pretty standard like MLA in that you will alphabetize, last name. So last name first, alphabetical order. You will, essentially indent the second line. And so you notice that second line and below is indented. So pretty standard, the same thing that you would do like like MLA. So that is some examples. Now what we're going to look at is actually different types of citations. So, for example, we'll look at formatting books. So typically they have the author, year of publication, the title, capital letter, also for the subtitle, the location, the publisher, you'll typically look at. So you've got the name, year, title. It was in, of course, Washington, D.C., American Psychological Association. So that's kind of your example where it breaks down. Now, when it comes to online periodicals, which I think a lot of students will probably use online periodicals, and what are some examples? Where could you go to get on online periodical? Give me an example.
You go to Summon, you find it through the MSSU library page.
Absolutely.
You do the search engine, and then it lists a bunch of other search engines that they all have to run.
There are so many different search engines. Now, I think when I was doing the MLA workshop last time, one thing I talked about was EBSCO. I love EBSCO. And that's largely just because I know it. I'm used to it. Now you have to actually subscribe for it, but the school pays for it here, so you can actually access it on campus. Now, because I can tell you, I don't really like the way things are set up here at the college when it comes to finding this stuff. Like you really have to do a lot of navigating.
Yeah.
I always go to Seminole State College's website. That's where I taught government history before. I just know their website really well, but since we actually subscribe for EBSCO, that's why I can access it here going to their website. So if I tried to do that at home, it wouldn't let me. But since we pay for it here, I can actually go to that website and be able to get access to it. So I like to go there. I click on library. It takes me over there where I can click on the EBSCO. It is a database where you can find all these type of various articles. What I also like about EBSCO, and this is why I mention it to you, it actually does a citation for you, which is nice. Because I would strongly encourage that, and we'll look at it here in a second, here in a little bit. But EBSCO is great because it actually does it for you. All you have to do is just copy and paste it. So it's really nice. So when it comes to the periodical, obviously you're going to have the author's names. You'll have the date of publication, title of the online periodical, the volume number, and then the big difference is, and this goes into internet sources and so forth, retrieved from. That is a big difference between MLA and ABA. Retrieved from. You don't write that in MLA. You write that when it comes to APA. So that is another difference that you will notice when it comes to APA versus MLA. So there's the example of how you would actually do it. So you got Bernstein, of course 2002 there. The title, 10 tips on writing, the living, in the web. A list, and then it has retrieved from, and then of course the actual web link. I've seen various things like in MLA, I have some professors, and the book now tells you that you don't have to have that link. But I can tell you, I've had professors tell me they want the entire link. So honestly, it just comes down to your professor. In MLA, they have you put web to indicate that it is the website. When I first started college, we didn't have to put web on there. We just put the link, and we have these little crazy brackets and so forth. But nowadays, they're saying you don't have to do it. Even though I can tell you there are plenty of professors that want you to put that link on there. But for APA, it's just put retrieve from and then the actual link. Have you noticed differences that you've encountered so far in your class from that looks different from this?
Question, how come
Yeah.
the second example is indented, the second line is indented in first? Is there a reason why, or should we?
Well, let's see here. So if it's, the title, of the article, then the title of the online periodical, so that's the name of the company, so that is why it's italicized typically. So I may have some other examples that probably are a little bit better.
I think what she was
I
asking.
copied and pasted this, so it may not have formatted the way it's supposed
I think
to.
what she was asking on the one
What's that?
above, like your example that says author, comma, AA, and the second line where you should indent over.
Ah,
Yeah. it's
yeah,
not indented.
yeah. I just basically copied and pasted this in there, so the
Okay.
formatting
It
is
should
not
be-
exactly.
The way is to indent.
Yes, you
The bottom,
indent,
okay.
yeah. I copied and pasted, so it didn't line up exactly like it should, so, but yes, you do indent, anything from that second line and below, you indent.
Okay.
Now, my question is, how do you indent it? I've seen students take hours to do this, which is kind of surprising. So, you would think that you would be able to easily do it, so tell me.
On the line spacing, you can just put hanging and that is
Yep. Back in the day, back in 2001, 2002, is a little bit harder on some of these programs. So sometimes you would click on that second line and then you would just hit the tab button. But sometimes everything would be moving over, and you'd be like, I don't want everything to move over. I just want the second line and below. And so what we used to have to do is we'd have to hit enter and then hit the tab, and then it would do it. It's the weirdest thing back in the day. So I don't know if you still have to do that, but obviously you don't. So on here, but yeah. So you had a good question. I mean, yes, it should be indented. That second line, and I tried to do it. I think I actually tried to do it on this one, and kind of move it over a little bit, but so that second line and below has to be indented. Once again, you got your example. You have your name, you have the year of publication. It actually has when it came out, which is May 6th. And then the title, and then we know that it came from the New York Times, so we have that, and then we have retrieve from, and then the actual link. And so now that would be like a newspaper, article, and so forth. And then, what about a Kindle? How many of you, read books online, with your Kindle or something? So you actually can cite that as well. So let's say you have a book, that you downloaded on your Kindle, and that's where you get it from. This is an example of how to use that. Not a lot of students maybe use this too often, but so Kindle books, you have the author, whoever it is, the year of publication, obviously the title, and then you have to show what type of Kindle it is. So this was the Kindle DX, version, and you see those little brackets type deal or whatever, and then of course retrieve from just Amazon.com. So pretty straightforward, easy. So if you do decide that you want to download books or whatever, you can certainly follow that. I don't see a lot of students that do that. I mean, but every once in a while. How many of you will most likely do something like that now? I mean, how many of you get on your Kindle or read or download books and stuff? Okay, so do you think you may do it potentially?
Yeah, I didn't know you could actually do
Yeah. So and there's different types, and I can tell you, you can look on at Purdue Owl. They'll give you a whole bunch of other examples of other type of software that you can use for that. So obviously, remember, I don't have this on here as an example, but you can do personal interviews, which you can also do in MLA. You can cite that as well. You can even do interviews by phone, which you can cite, interviews by email that you cite as well. And they have all those examples on Purdue Owl. So just remember that it's always good, like when you're talking about sources, You know, when we talk about primary sources versus secondary sources, you know, personal interviews and interviewing people, those are the type of sources you really want, if you can, you know, from experts. So if you're writing a paper, let's say you're writing a paper on this year's election, you could actually go do a personal interview with a professor over in the political science department. That would be a good source, you know, to have. You know, so personal interviews are always really good if you can. Okay, so some places where you can go for additional resources. Purdue OWL is I would say like the gold standard in my opinion. And how many of you have gone to Purdue OWL? So quite a few. And so why did you go there? How did you first discover Purdue OWL? Who told you about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost like from day one, that's where they tell you to go. And so there's a reason, because it is so good. What I really love about Purdue OWL is, I mean, obviously you can look at APA, Chicago style, MLA, I mean, pretty much they all have it. But what I like really is that they also have a sample paper on there. I like that, because then I can actually see what an entire paper is supposed to look like. And I will go and I will look at that paper thoroughly. And what I also like about it is that it has little bubbles to the side that explain why you do that. That is really nice, you know, because I want to know why. And so that's why Purdue OWL is a great place, because it really breaks every component down. Of course, EBSCO, that's what I like, you know, so, you know, if you didn't know how to spell it, there it is. You know, but EBSCO is a great source. I love it. I'm going to try to go there here in a minute, you know, and show you. And so now obviously RefWorks, you know, which, you know, is located on the school's website, which I don't really like personally, but some people do. And so you know, machine or citationmachine.net, which we were talking about earlier, good place, but I would just say you have to be careful, because sometimes it's not always the most up to date. And so you may use it and then realize that they have some period or commas off, and then you have to go back and try to find and fix that. So be careful. That's why I always mention that. You've got to be careful, because sometimes it will be slightly off. And if you're relying solely on that, you could get in some trouble. So just be careful with that. It's not a bad place, but you do have to be cautious when you do that. So, and obviously the conclusions, that's just what we covered, but I want to go to the website real fast and show you what I was talking about with EBSCO. So, I think I'm the only one that actually uses Internet Explorer. You know, everyone complains I use Internet Explorer. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's weird.
So you don't like it, okay? So now tell me why you don't like it.
Google Chrome is so much nicer.
Okay. And another thing that students you know, complain to me about is, like, I like going to Yahoo.
Oh.
What?
No one likes Yahoo anymore. No one.
Who uses Yahoo?
Old people. You know.
My grandma uses Google.
I know. People are attacking me already.
I actually use Bing because I get like paid to do it.
So what I'm doing here is because I mean, Seminole State College, it's just SSC, you know, comma, and I put OK for Oklahoma because there is another Seminole State College in Florida. So you got to be careful.
What's it called?
Seminole State College.
Seminole?
Seminole State. It's a community college. It's where I got my associate's degree at. It's also where I taught. I just go there because I know the website well. So, but you have to be careful because there are two Seminole State colleges. There's one in Florida, and then the one, of course, in Oklahoma, which is in Seminole, Oklahoma. So I'm going to click on here. So this is their website. This is if I want to go and check out EBSCO. Now, obviously, they have it here on the campus.